So I had this idea. I want to design and build my own terrarium, but a very unique one. I want to essentially take an infinity cube style container and kind of just shove a terrarium inside of it so that I can have this mini infinite forest as a centerpiece for my kitchen. The problem with all of this is I'm not a very good plant owner. I have killed pretty much every single plant I have ever owned. I'm like 0 for 7 at this point, and I don't kill them on purpose, but I just can't seem to keep them alive. So hopefully with a terrarium instead, with it being lower maintenance, and hopefully eventually it becoming self-sustaining, that will reduce the chances of me killing it. Probably. So for the design of this terrarium, there are 2 options that we can take. For option 1, we could do something simple, clean, knock it out in a weekend. Or we could over-engineer the hell out of this thing and make it so complicated and intricate that I give myself an aneurysm and want to cry, and the project takes 3 months instead, and at the end of it, I hate myself. Now, I've gone ahead and gathered a lot of the materials I will need for this project. As always, there will be links to everything in the description down below. And what's also down there is the little subscribe button. You should probably go ahead and click that too so you don't miss out on any future projects or builds. But let's get back to this one for the time being. So for the design and shape of this terrarium, I went through a lot of different iterations, but I just started out with just a regular cube, and honestly, it's kind of lame. Not to mention, I also have a size limitation for what I can actually cut on my Glowforge, and this was kind of the max I could get, so I think we can do a lot better. I tried a dodecahedron as well, and the size was a lot better, a lot bigger for kind of what will actually fit the space. And I also tried messing around with the proportions of it a little bit, kind of stretching it, maybe skewing it, creating one flat side, but in the end, to save my sanity on this project, everything's gonna need to be uniform and modular. So then after that, I also tried a 20-sided shape, and I could see the vision for this immediately. It fits well in the space, it's built out of modular parts, so everything is easily repeatable. So now that we figured out the shape of this thing, there's just a couple of tiny little things we need to iron out afterwards. First, we need to design a base for it. Then we also need to extrude all of the materials to their actual thickness so we know what we're working with in real life. After that, we need to design all the custom wiring and the custom lighting to fit this project. Not to mention, I also have to figure out a way to hide all of that. Furthermore, I also need a way to take all of that off in case anything ever breaks in the future or I need to do repairs. Easy, right? Well, it actually is easy, for you all at least. You all don't have to watch me bang my head against the wall for 2 months to figure all of this stuff out, as I've been working on this for a long time now, before even filming this part, so we can just head straight into the building and I can explain everything along the way. I took the 1/8 inch acrylic panels through the bandsaw to cut them all down into a more manageable size, also making sure to overcut them since I will be trimming them down further. After we get all those pieces cut, we can finally move on to the laser cutter. I need nice clean edges for this, and although there are other tools that you can use for this job, I recently got a Glowforge and it's a simple tool to make all of these acrylic panels the exact same size. The Glowforge has already been an insanely fun tool to have, and I'm already planning future videos around it, so you will definitely see more of it in the future. But if you are considering one, there is a massive discount for them if you use my link in the description below to order one. Now for all of the edges and the lighting. A lot of this stuff is going to have to be 3D printed since this is all custom. Unlike normal infinity cubes, I also want the lights to be only at the corners so the edges are as visibly thin as I can make them so you can see in more. With all of the lighting now condensed at these corners, as well as it being the meeting point for 5 compound angles all coming to a single point, these parts are pretty complicated, so I'm going to come back to them in a moment, but the last part I had to figure out was how to make all this come apart easily. I don't want to glue this all in place because I have been kind of making this on the fly and making it up as I go, so if anything goes wrong, it needs to come off. So instead, I'm using cables and hardware essentially to tension all the corners onto this thing in place instead of gluing everything onto the actual acrylic. I have a giant bucket of hardware I've been carrying around for years at this point, looking for a project to use it on, and I thought I could use some on this project, but it's a little big for what I need. So I went ahead and found fisheye hooks and turnbuckles that were more scaled appropriately to this project. Now let me show you the evolution of these corner caps, because as I said before, these things are a little complicated, but really we only care about where the final version ended up. There are two parts to these corners. On the bottom part, the LED tape can wrap around and fold in strips of 2, and the top can then screw onto the base. There are holes on the bottom of it for the LED lights to stick into, and then there are also holes at each of the corners for the wire to feed in and out of to power the LEDs. And all that wiring will then get covered by the edge guards. It looks like a mess inside because it is, but the idea is that all the lights can get crammed in here and be ugly but hidden, so the rest of the project can be sleek and clean. And thankfully, because these are 3D printed, it's easy enough to run it again until I have all of the pieces needed. Thanks to the modularity of this, the process is fairly simple for making a lot of these for each of the corners. I can cut all of the LED strips to the size that I need. I can hot glue them all in place, making sure to test and touch the hot glue multiple times like a monkey, and then screw on the lid. Going back to the acrylic panels, I have started to apply the film to all of them, and this is the stuff that's going to give the terrarium the infinite reflection look inside. After the film is on, I can start assembling them together, and that's really what the scariest part of this project is. I need to start welding all these panels together, so I'm using this acrylic solvent to essentially melt and rejoin the panels, but this is kind of tricky overall. First, because this stuff is pretty unforgiving and can ruin the acrylic fast if it gets anywhere other than exactly where it's supposed to be. And then because I'm trying to connect a corner to a corner, which isn't ideal because there's no real surface area for it to glue to, I had to get a thicker solvent specifically for that. So I'm in the middle of a pretty complicated glue up right now. I've started to glue a lot of these single panels together in groups of 2 just as I thought it'd be easier to assemble this whole thing, but I'm noticing a bit of a problem. Let me show you on the practice piece. The problem is with the film, thankfully, not the solvent. The way that this film works is that it allows a certain amount of light through it, or its VTL. And for this stuff, it's about an 80-20 split, which is ideal for infinity reflections. However, this is not good for my custom lighting option, and that is because the lights are on the outside. Normally, this isn't a problem on the regular builds since the lighting is internal, but since I have this wet environment, the lighting and wiring is all external, and the lighting will need to fight against the film, and it will reduce the effectiveness of the LED's ability to shine in and light up the environment enough. So if I thought of this sooner, I could have thought of a more elegant solution to this, but I think now the best course of action is to just cut a corner off of all of these so that the maximum amount of light is able to come into this through the LEDs. For the assembly of all these panels, I have been using these 3D printed guides along the way to at least try and hold the panels fairly close to where they should be connected, since trying to eyeball 138.2 degrees would be a nightmare. But I've already made this a nightmare since I didn't design in any tolerance to this whatsoever, so everything has to come together perfectly. Whoops, that was a little bit of an oversight, but for the lid, this is the only unique panel on here with just an inset hole cut out of it with more 3D printed parts to attach to it with an ergonomic grip on top, and then more pieces to hold the panel to the 3D printed parts. After putting the final piece of the lid on, this thing is really starting to take shape. I can now start soldering all of the connections needed for the lighting on this, which will take a very long time. But while the sucker behind me works on that, I wanted to touch very briefly on the actual lighting itself. Now, these are not specifically grow lights for plants, but I've read some articles in the past that makes it look like this will work for what I need on this project. And if you're thinking to yourself, you made it this far into a project without knowing if the most critical component would work, yeah, welcome to the channel. But I chose these specifically because I can control pretty much everything about them, from their brightness to the amount of time that they're on. I can even give the plants a rave if I wanted to. There's flexibility built into this to make it work. Also, while I was waiting on everything to dry in between, I went ahead and printed out the base for this project. I originally thought I was going to make it out of wood, but I figured, hey, I'll keep with the theme and make it 3D printed as well, and I can always make another base later if I wanted to. So the wiring is all done, and I definitely did not mess that up multiple times, but all of the lights are now on and working. And I would like to say that the hardware is all on and it's perfect as well, but it's not. It's a lot more visually dominating than I was originally expecting. So I'm kind of scrapping that whole idea, and I will just have to figure out something else instead. But we can move on now to the inside of the terrarium because I am now on a time limit since I've already acquired the plants. Although my sunburns have pretty much faded at this point, I spent pretty much half of my weekend hiking around and gathering miscellaneous items to put into the terrarium. Here's what I got. I found some wood with some pretty fantastic character to it. a couple of different types of moss, a lot of dirt, some ferns, and really a bunch of other plants that I'm not very good at identifying. So hopefully someone more knowledgeable than me in the comment section can identify these and exactly what they are. A lot of it was really just hiking around and finding stuff on the forest floor that I thought would look pretty, except for the mushrooms. I left all of those there, although there were some pretty cool ones. I also picked up some gravel for drainage and some petrified wood for some stone landscaping as well. So the general way a terrarium works is that there is a gravel layer on the bottom with soil in the middle and then plants on top. Simple, right? The water will trickle through the plants, through the soil, into the gravel, where it will be a drainage layer, and that allows the water to evaporate, condensate, come back down, cycle continues. Some people also include a layer right below the soil for activated charcoal, and I'm not using that for a very specific reason. I forgot to buy some. But I've seen some people say you need it, you don't need it, and really it kind of looks like it's more of a preference or not, so I'm just going to go without right now, and that can be added in later as needed. Adding everything into the terrarium is a little tricky, but filming this part is even more tricky, since this works best when there is a light shining inside, and I don't really have that set up yet since I didn't like the hardware. So I have to film through one of the holes that's clear, but you can already see the kind of infinite kaleidoscope effect that this is having. Now, after adding the first layer of gravel, I added in a sheet of tinfoil with holes cut into it just to keep the soil separate from the gravel, but to still let water get through. I started dumping in the dirt and just kept adding the plants, moss, wood, and the stones as I went through. I didn't really have a plan for the inside, and mainly I just filled it out with whatever I thought would fit the space and give it some nice variety through all of it. I grabbed just enough plants to fill all of this out, but I probably should have grabbed more soil just to create some larger and different parts of terrain. I am just so happy with how all of this turned out on the inside, and I think I figured out a replacement for the hardware as well. I'm switching over to a polyester cord instead, and I can just add a double cinch knot to either side to give the adjustment needed while still remaining very discreet and not visually dominating on the outside, and I'm just so much more happy with this look. And with the finishing touches on this thing, getting the edge guards on, applying the felt cushioning to all of these support legs, we're calling this thing done. But because of the nature of this build, it looks good during the day, but at nighttime, that's where this thing really shines.